Hi everybody, welcome to the webinar. There's still a few people still dropping in, so we're just going to give people a couple of minutes to come in and arrive on the webinar, if that's all right. Great. Okay, we're going to get started. Welcome to the webinar. So this is all around planning ahead for decision making. So those that are familiar of these webinars, they're part of the new Be Human movement, Let's Talk About series, where people have said various themes and subjects that are important to people and want to know more about them and want to have some really sort of frank and real conversations about them. I'm Julie Stansfield, that's me there. And there's also Gaynor as well, who are part of the Be Human movement, and we'll be hosting and facilitating. We've also got Sam Clark from Learning Disability England as well, and she'll be around on the question box to help. And Gaynor will be around to help if you've got any technical or sound issues. This webinar is recorded, and we record every one of these webinars so that other people are able to see if they're not able to come on these webinars live. So publicly, they put on the Be Human website, but they're also put on publicly on YouTube as well. So bear that in mind if you're asking any questions live. None of the question boxes, so the private written ones, don't go out publicly, but certainly if you voice over and you're asking a question on your voice, that will be made public then for other people to hear as it goes on to YouTube later on. So as I said, this is specifically about planning ahead, and this is around power of attorney. So how to participate today? Most of you will see a box like this, and there's a little hand there that you can raise if you want to ask a question. If you raise your hand there after the speakers have finished and we get to the question time, I'll be able to see your hand there, and then I'll be able to unmute you and you can ask the panel your question live or give your comment live on the webinar. If you're not happy about doing that live and your voice coming over the webinar, there's a question box here, and you can pop in any question you want there. It could be on sound technical issues, or it could be comments that you've got, and we will then facilitate and read them out. We'll either read the questions out for the panel, or we'll certainly read your comments out. If you're on an iPad, it's slightly different, but you've still got the hand and the question box if you're on an iPad today. So thanks everybody for coming. So what to expect? We've got three brilliant speakers, as we do. So we've got Zoe Harris, who's the founder of a social enterprise called My Care Matters, which this year published a My Future Care Handbook. And she'll talk, I'm not going to talk about that, she'll talk about that, but it's basically a really good way of people thinking through and planning for future care, and Zoe will talk about that. She'll also give us an overview of what a power of attorney is. So people often get confused between power of attorney and court of protection. So we'll separate those out. This webinar is purely about power of attorney. There'll be another webinar that's taking place next week that's around court of protection, and we'll talk about the differences in that. We've also got Joe Whitaker here, and he's became a power of attorney for his mother-in-law before she developed dementia, but he's also got one for himself now. So he's going to talk through the reality of that for both his mother-in-law and himself. And then we've got Jane Knight, who runs which supports families to know their rights and gains information. So Jane supported an awful lot of families, because this isn't just about people who are older who might get dementia. This might be for people who have a stroke. It might be for younger people with different learning disabilities. So it sort of goes across the working age, adults as well as older people. So thank you, all three of you, for coming. They're all muted in the background at the moment. But without further ado, we'll start. And welcome, Zoe. Thanks for joining us, Zoe.
Thanks, Julie. Thanks very much. And hello, everyone. As Julie says, my name is Zoe Harris. I'm an ex-carer for my late husband who lived with dementia. and also of my late mother who lived with COPD. And as a result of those experiences, I set up a not-for-profit social enterprise called My Care Matters, which has a mission to improve people's experience of care. Next slide, please, Julie. So just a quick bit of shameless promotion. We've recently published the My Future Care Handbook. It's a comprehensive layman's guide to all those things that we might want to think about, perhaps we should be thinking about as we approach later life. If you'd like to know more about that, I've provided links to a number of resources at the end of this presentation, and I think they're going to be made available via email and attached to the online webinar as well. Next slide, Julie. So this is very much a whistle-stop tour of what a lasting power of attorney is, why you should have one, and how to get one in place. Next slide. What is a lasting power of attorney? It's a legal document that enables you to appoint one or more people, they're called attorneys, to make decisions on your behalf if you've lost the capacity to do so for yourself. It's existed in its current form since 2007, replacing the enduring power of attorney, which some people may still have, and as long as it was signed and witnessed before 2007, it is still valid. Next slide. There are actually two distinct lasting powers of attorney that you can have, one for property and financial affairs, and the other for health and well-being. You can create one or both, and you can ask the same person or people to act as your attorney for both, or you can choose different people for each one. And I'll say a bit more about who your attorneys might be in a moment. One difference between the two is that for the Property and Financial Affairs LPA, you can decide whether your attorneys can make decisions as soon as it's been registered with the Office of the Public Guardian, or only when you don't have mental capacity. Whereas the Health and Wellbeing LPA only kicks in when you don't have the mental capacity to make a decision. Attorneys will need to familiarize themselves with the principles of the Mental Capacity Act if there is any question as to whether you or not you have mental capacity in a given situation. So perhaps the simplest way of describing a power of attorney is that it authorizes one or more people to act as if they are you within certain circumstances. So they can go into the bank and make any decisions within the limits you've set that you would make. Or they can talk to your doctors as if they were you, not merely a relative interested in your welfare. What they can't do is alter things like your will, or if you've created one, an advanced decision to refuse treatment. Next slide. Why should you have a lasting power of attorney? So I think it's easier to answer this by considering the scenario if you don't have one. If you don't have a lasting power of attorney in place and you lose the capacity to make decisions for yourself, no one has the right to act on your behalf or make decisions for you, whether it's accessing your bank account to pay the bills or decide where you should live. Without one in place, whoever you expect to take care of your financial affairs or speak on your behalf when decisions are being made regarding your health and well-being, they'll have to apply to the Court of Protection to be appointed as a deputy. This doesn't provide the same level of control as being an attorney. It can be a complicated process. It always takes time, and it's much more expensive than creating a lasting power of attorney. So it might be worth mentioning here my own experience of using an LPA. My late husband and I set ourselves up to be each other's attorney. He had capacity for quite a while after getting a diagnosis of dementia, but eventually I did have to take over, and I went through the process of informing the bank and other organizations. It gave me clear authority to act on his behalf, which was particularly important when we were making decisions at times like when he had to move to a care home, for example. That was a stressful enough time anyway, and not having the power of attorney in place would have taken that stress to a whole new level. Having it in place, on the other hand, gave us both peace of mind even before we had to use it. I should make the point here that he and I set ours up way before we had any inkling that his would be needed for a whole 7 years before he died. We were much more thinking about one of us being in a coma after a road accident or something like that. So none of us knows what might be around the corner. Next slide, please, Julie. How do I get one in place? Whether you go through a lawyer or you do it yourself is something you might talk through with other people, but essentially only you will know which is the right way for you. Doing it yourself, by the way, can be either online or by downloading the forms and completing them by hand. There will be people who tell you the do-it-yourself method is a piece of cake, and others will say that for them it was a horrible nightmare. And those who've gone to a lawyer will say they felt that that was the best thing they could have done. But others are going to say it was a complete waste of money. I did my current one online. I'd already done a lot of research for the handbook. I'm comfortable using the internet, and I'd given some thought to the various options available. The gov.uk website explains everything very clearly, but it does take a bit of time, and filling in the form is just one part of the process. It's worth saying that you still need to print out the forms and post them once they've been signed. If your circumstances are even the slightest bit complicated, or you're unsure about any aspects of it, you may feel more comfortable taking legal advice. Next slide, please, Julie. So here, in terms of who and how many attorneys you should appoint, your circumstances may make it immediately obvious who you would appoint. If not, it needs careful thought. Consider whether your choice will cause tension in your family. Think through the practical aspects if they're not, for example, the person likely to be your primary carer. There may be people in your life who are the logical choice to be potentially responsible for your finances, and others who might be best to take on health and well-being. In certain circumstances, you may even want to appoint a professional, though of course there are cost implications if you go down that route. And in all cases, it is obviously important that you trust that they will at all times act in your best interests and reflect your wishes. You may want to add more than one, in which case you'll need to decide whether they're to act jointly, where every decision has to be agreed by all, or jointly and severally, where attorneys can make decisions on their own or together, and there's scope to select a mix of these. Bear in mind that you can remove someone by writing to the Office of the Public Guardian, but to add an attorney, you need to create a new LPA. What you can do is include replacements when creating the document, so they can step in if your first choice of attorney is unable to act for you, and in that case, that particular LPA can then continue. Next slide, please, Julie. So, a few tips. The better informed your attorney is, the better they'll be able to act in the way you would wish them to. If you're going to ask someone to speak on your behalf and ensure decisions are being taken in your best interests, it's obviously helpful to ensure they know what you would be saying in a certain situation if you were able. For example, if you're currently supporting someone financially now, but there might be some doubt as to whether you would have continued to do so, you must leave very clear instructions so the attorney can be seen to be following your wishes. And one of the most discussed areas of decision-making, of course, for an attorney is around life-sustaining treatment. There is an option within the document to authorize your attorney to give or refuse consent to life-sustaining treatment. If this matters to you, it's important that your attorney or attorneys understand your wishes. And if you wish to refuse treatment under certain conditions, you might even want to create an ADRT, an advanced decision to refuse treatment, which is a separate legal document and will provide any healthcare professionals with a clear picture of what you want. It seems that LPAs being created after July 2020 are going to be made available online now to organisations who need to see them. So your attorneys can just give them access with a code. But I suspect that it'll take a while for some organisations to follow that route, and they'll still expect to see a certified copy. You can create certified copies of your LPA yourself all the time you're still able to make your own decisions. Given that your attorneys may need to provide copies to a large number of organisations, it may make sense to create a number of those whilst you have capacity. And finally, one thought about the internet. It is a fantastic place, of course, to do research, but it's very easy to get sucked into reading one of the numerous websites that will come up when searching for power of attorney. but it may not be relevant for your situation, for your country, and that is true even of the countries within the UK. Next slide, Julie. So these are the few links that I mentioned earlier. Some areas that may be useful for you, and as I say, they're going to be made available to you. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much, Zoe. So we're going to carry on and move on to our next speakers, and then once all the speakers are finished, we'll have a chance to take questions. So our next speaker is Joe Whitaker. Thanks, Joe, for joining us.
Okay, you're very welcome, and thanks very much for that, Zoe. It was very interesting. My partner and I took out a power of attorney with his mum, which was about 20 years ago. At the time, because my partner and I were in a gay relationship, but in fact we were not married, so we went to a solicitor in order to take out what was then an enduring power of attorney. It was in 2015 when our mum was diagnosed as having Alzheimer's, and that was going fine, no issues there. We were getting to understand how best to support mum, and she was in fact looking at ways of supporting us also. But one evening, late November 2018, she went wandering, and she ended up in somebody's garden late at night. We didn't know she'd gone. They called the police. The police collected her and then took her to A&E. And when she was at A&E, she was, well, we were told later that she was being rather aggressive. Anyway, they had given her an injection and sedated her. That sedation lasted for 3 days in hospital, where we thought she was going to die. We were very disturbed, but anyway, we were at the hospital and she did come round. And we were again concerned at the fact that she looked incredibly frail, incredibly physically unable to function. And we were then told by the multidisciplinary team, and again, the multidisciplinary team, as we found them, like so often, were disharmingly pleasant. And I've come to recognize that often professionals in statutory services are disarmingly pleasant as long as you're accepting what it is that they've got to offer. If you want something different, often the mood changes. And we were told by the multidisciplinary team that mum would be taken to a specialist rehabilitation centre, which was some 12 miles away. We were not particularly happy about that. We were really quite concerned. But again, being in that situation, we were incredibly compliant because we believed that they had mum's best interests at heart, and they knew what she required. But they told us at the specialist centre she would get lots of support for physiotherapy, a speech therapist, how to eat properly. And we thought, well, you know, it's worth that. It's worth actually giving her that opportunity to develop those skills once more. But we decided we would go to the centre before mum went. And when we went to the centre, we talked to the manager, and the manager said, whatever they've told you is not going to happen. That the support you've been told she will get, she will not get. We don't have the resources. And one of the first questions she asked, is she a wanderer? And it took me some time to wonder what that was. But mum lives a 24-hour clock. She sleeps and she walks whenever she requires it. And as soon as we said, yes, she does wander, well, absolutely, she won't be coming here. So we went back to the hospital, the multidisciplinary team, and we said that we didn't want her to go there. And they said, well, I'm afraid that's where she is going. They brought down senior staff, and the senior member of staff then said to us, we have to take the interest of your mum at heart. And we said, but we do have an enduring power of attorney. The whole situation changed. The whole situation changed. Within 3 days, mum was discharged home. And we had the appropriate arrangements at home. And that was 2 years ago. And mum is flourishing. Even during this period of the lockdown, she is flourishing, and now we're very fortunate because both of us are retired. We're able to offer the support mum requires. And it certainly doesn't resolve the tensions you have with local authority, particularly when you're applying for continuing healthcare, which we are doing. However, it makes it absolutely clear that you are able to make the decisions that we know mum would have made. And subsequently, we ourselves have taken out enduring power of attorney for each other. Plus, I have my son, who's also the partner, both for my partner and my son. They're enduring power of attorney for me, and for me and my son, we're enduring power of attorney for my partner. So and I've been advocating power of attorney for everybody within our extended family. It's not solved all the problems. There are lots of issues that we have to deal with, but certainly being able to speak with confidence about banking, about insurance, about the AA, all sorts of things that we would never have expected. It's made it that much easier and much more comfortable to manage those very awkward situations that we know we would have had without it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Joe. Our next speaker is Jane Knight. Hi, Jane. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, hi, everybody. Excuse me, I'm coughing. Well, as you can see, my name's Jane Knight. I actually deal with, the last 40 years, I've been supporting people with learning disabilities and families. And during the whole sort of lifetime of somebody with a learning disability, once the person reaches 18, it's an extremely important factor that families, people, you know, who love that person, actually have the power to act for that person should that person start to or be deemed to have lost capacity. An important element in the lifetime of the person sort of post-18. I also have a father that has been diagnosed with dementia, and it's really made me realise, looking at the whole aspects of lasting power of attorney, you know, that I haven't got one, and neither has my father. And we were talking pre-panel yesterday about some of the difficulties perhaps in broaching that subject with people, which I hope we can also address today as well. An example that really has affected me very, very significantly, and I think it's important to have these types of examples, is that I was approached by a lady on Uno. It's a little voluntary site I run to, you know, help people with advice that they might need, and I started that site after my mother died. And I had a very fortunate experience in that my mother nearly died, and I'd actually planted some daffodils and things during that time, thinking, I don't think my mum's going to see these, but I'll plant them for my mum. But actually my mum survived that, and her and I were able to sit on a little bench at my house and look at these daffodils coming up, and I broached the subject and I told her, you know, I planted those, Mum, thinking that you'd never actually see them, and here we are now looking at them. Isn't life strange? And we got into the discussion about what she'd want in the future of her life. And I said to her, Mum, would you want to ever not be resuscitated? You know, do you think there's a point where that might not be what you wanted? And my mum was somebody that was always part of everything, absolutely part of everything. And she said to me, oh no, love, she said, it's fine. She said, I don't do much now anyway. So she said, plug me in the corner. And she said, only God says when it's time for that. So she said, anything that it can do to keep me alive. And I was quite surprised by that answer. I was the person with my mother when she died, and it wasn't appropriate to actually resuscitate my mum at that point. But I was really glad I'd had that conversation with her. But we didn't have an LPA. The situation I'd say that really affected me very profoundly was that I was contacted by a family that said they were completely desperate. They'd looked after their brother, in fact, with Down syndrome for many years. And he'd become poorly and he'd gone into hospital. And they asked whether I could help, because what was happening was that they were actually putting the brother on what's known as the Liverpool pathway, and that meant, you know, no food, no drink, and sort of allowing him to die basically during that time. And I actually physically went up to the hospital to help them. I got in my car and off I went. To, you know, it was an hour and a half's drive to get there because it seemed such a terrible situation. And when I got there, that was the case, and the whole family were around him. They'd always been around him all their lives, and the sister, who'd always advocated so strongly for him, felt very inadequate in being able to put his case forward, and she wasn't being listened to. Subsequently, I managed to get through to the national team and contact the clinical lead at the national team for people with learning disabilities. And they got through to the hospital, and we had an interview, an appointment with the surgeon actually the next day, all on the fact, you know, that there was a lasting power of attorney there, because had there not been, that just would not have been considered. And the surgeon actually decided at that meeting that he would put the peg in that they were actually asking about. And her brother went on to have 3 more years of a very, very lovely life. Without that, that certainly wouldn't have been considered. So there's an importance throughout life, an importance for all of us, and certainly something now that I'm considering very much about myself and my husband and my father. And so thank you for inviting me today.
Thanks so much, Jane. Okay, so you've got your question box. There's some questions there already that I'll just start listing through, and then there's also your little hand that you can put up. So at the moment there's 2 hands up, so I don't know whether Glenda and Rob, you're wanting to come on live to ask a question. So if you are, leave your hand up and I'll come to you in a minute. If you're not, just pull your hand down and then I'll know whether or not you want to ask a question. And we've got Sam as well online. Hi, Sam, do you want to say hello to everybody? And then people will know that you're keeping your eye on some of the questions as well.
Hi, hello everyone, sorry. And mute is always a challenge for us, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Okay, so one that came earlier on via email was, I've been told that we can't get a lasting power of attorney due to our children, I'm assuming adult children, not understanding what it means. Therefore, we have to go to court. So touching on what you were saying, Zoe, about the court of protection, if somebody's already not got capacity. So Jane, I just think it'd be helpful to you explain the difference, because I know you've helped people both with power of attorney and court of protection. So without getting into detail or legal detail of the Capacity Act, just in very general real terms, the difference between power of attorney and having to go to court of protection.
And did you want me to answer that, Julie? Did you say at this point?
Yeah. Thanks, Jane.
Just make some comments about that anyway. I do deal with both situations for people with learning disabilities or people who are considered to have capacity or not have capacity. And what happens is that there is a capacity assessment done for that individual that actually says whether they would have the ability to be able to make decisions for themselves and have the capacity to do that. If they have capacity to do that, then you can take out, the family member or whoever is deemed the appropriate person to do that can take out a lasting power of attorney in the same way that Zoe has actually described. If it is actually deemed that the person doesn't have capacity, then that's a separate application for deputyship to the Court of Protection. If everybody's in agreement with that, and there's no objections from the local authority or perhaps any other family member about that, that can be a relatively smooth process as well. There's nothing different between a lasting power of attorney application and a deputyship application, except that they are very, very different models, obviously one for somebody with capacity and one not, but it is about the original decision about whether somebody has capacity to do that, and whether there's any objection to it. Objections might come, for example, from another sibling. It might come from parents who are no longer living together, where one might say that they want to be a deputy for somebody. There may be objections from the local authority if the local authority feel that there are reasons that they actually wouldn't want those family members to actually be deputies. And that does happen sometimes when there are long, drawn out kind of arguments about, for example, where the local authority might be saying somebody wants to live somewhere, or they want somebody to live somewhere, for example, in supported living, that the families don't like that supported living. And so best interest decisions happen about the person. And without having that lasting power of attorney or deputyship, your involvement in that is diminished. It doesn't mean at the end of the day always either that if you hold either of those that you will get completely your own way, which I think is what Joe alluded to about the machinations with the local authority, but it certainly helps in terms of your ability to exercise a little bit more power in those discussions.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much, Jane. There was another question that came through on Twitter of how much does it cost? So just on a general basis, it's £82 per registration. So one for the property and finance is £82, and then one for health and welfare is £82. So that's the basic registration. If your income is less than £12,000 a year, that's reduced to 41, so you get 50% off. But then, of course, that's plus printing and postage. And if you'll use a solicitor, it's plus the solicitor's own fees as well. So it can be anything from the normal £82 per registration right the way up then to the extra plus add-on fees for support to be able to do that. And there's detail on that on some of the links as well that I know Zoe's put in. I'm going to come to Glenda now. Glenda, I'm going to unmute you now so that you can ask your question live. So you're self-muted. I've unmuted you, but you need to unmute yourself as well, Glenda. So if you click that little red icon that looks like an old-fashioned microphone. Can you find that, Glenda? Okay, I'll leave that open. I'm going to come. Oh, yeah, you're there, Glenda. Hi, Glenda.
Hi.
What's your
Well,
question?
I don't really have a question, actually. I was just listening to you all. But I will ask. I've got elderly parents. Both are getting very dementia way, can't access anything. I'm trying to sort a power of attorney out for myself to do it. I have 3 other brothers. 2 of them are okay for me to do it, but the other one is a bit of a pain in the rear end, really, and he's always got an opinion and takes over. So can we carry on just doing it with one person and not having anybody else on it?
So Zoe, would you be able to answer that? I mean, yeah.
Yes,
Zoe.
Glenda, hi. This very much depends on the capacity of your parents to make a decision about this, because obviously you can only get this lasting power of attorney in place for them if they are able to appoint. And so with your support and support of other family members, it's for them to decide who they would like to act as their attorneys. This does sound like one of those classic situations where you need to have something absolutely watertight, so there's no problems in the future and no misunderstandings. If you feel that one brother is going to not be happy that you take it on either with him or others, you may need to take legal advice. But your parents, where at all possible, must be included in all of the decision making. These boil down to the sort of principles of the Mental Capacity Act, and as long as they've got ability to make decisions around this, then you can continue. But if they are found not to have the ability to make these decisions, then putting in a power of attorney is not an option for you anyway.
Okay, I'll say both of them are quite, they do know everything, but they just find it very hard to understand what people say to them. And, you know, the bank, for example, if they go into the bank, they can't understand what the bank are explaining because they can't hear.
Yeah, so again, that certainly doesn't mean to say they don't have capacity. I would strongly urge you to continue in your endeavours to get power of attorney in place as soon as possible. But you may want to take legal advice to see what the best way forward is for you in the light of your relationship with your brothers.
You'll say, because I'm already doing it now, you see, but I'm not legally bound to do it. I just do it to help them.
Yes, and of course, everybody, whilst they have capacity, can ask anybody to do what they like anyway. It's when at some point they've lost capacity and you continue to do that, if that's challenged, you don't have the legal right to be taking charge of any of their financial or health affairs, and that's where the problems could occur.
Okay, thank you. Well, you've covered what I thought anyway, so yeah. Okay, lovely. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Glenda. I'm going to come to you now, Rob. So again, you just have to unmute yourself.
Am I coming through now?
Yes. Hi, Rob.
Excellent. Right. First off, I just wanted to thank all three of you for your kind of brief presentations today. They've been very interesting to listen to. I've actually been looking into a little bit of context for you into power of attorney for about the last year or so, because over the last couple of years, I've actually lost 3 of my 4 grandparents. And the last one in particular, we had massive issues around deprivation of liberty safeguards and last power of attorney basically completely failing her and us as family and kind of ripping us apart. So we've all been kind of taking our turns recently to kind of look at putting in things in place for each of us as individuals. So I've been looking at mine over the last year, and I'm fine with the paperwork and all of that being set up because my aunt is actually a solicitor, and she's looked at kind of revising my will, which I've had in place for years, and then all of the kind of the LPA initial paperwork. The issue that I'm having with the whole process is the my best friend has actually indicated that she's willing to be my LPA, but I'm struggling to figure out how to frame the conversation that I have with her around what decisions I would make in certain circumstances. And because there are clearly so many things that could happen in the future, and we can't predict everything that's going to happen or have a particular scenario that's going to cover absolutely everything. So I'd be interested to know from each of you how you've actually framed that discussion to actually give your LPAs a realistic idea of what decisions you might make in certain circumstances that gives them the confidence that they are making your kind of best interest decision. And then second to that, I think, Zoe, your online booklet looks fantastic. I just wondered if that kind of goes into any of that sort of thinking, and if so, is it available as a digital download or just a physical copy? Because I struggle with a spinal cord injury to actually turn pages and handle books. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Rob. So Zoe, are you okay to start with that, with your book and your personal experience of having, we were talking yesterday about how difficult these conversations are. So yeah, it's a really good question. Thanks, Zoe.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. It is a really good question. First of all, the handbook, at the moment, it is only a physical document. We do want to take it online, but brief research we've done on that at the moment, just producing sort of 60, 70 pages of lots of information as a PDF or something doesn't work. It needs to be designed properly to work as a digital resource. So that'll come in the future. At the moment, it is just it's a handbook. And yes, you're quite right. How to have the conversation is one of those challenges. I think you've got a head start with your friend. It does sound like you've already opened the conversation. A bottle of wine always helps, I find, if you're a drinker, to break the ice. But joking aside, perhaps you start with the tangible, lightweight stuff, but and sort of talk about a bucket list of the things that you'd like to do, and have her understand about the things that are important to you, and perhaps talk in general terms about your beliefs and wishes in a very general sense. Because you're right, you won't be able to write down every single particular circumstance. There are online suggestions for areas that you can cover, and they might help you. But if you're really worried about it, again, lawyers will be able to help you with the form of words. But I think if you're just asking somebody that you trust to look after your best interests, the best thing you can do is keep talking about what those things are. You can chat about the things, if you sound like you're happy to talk about your own future, the things that worry you, and perhaps even start jotting them down and share those with her, so that you've got something to talk about when and if you can sit down properly. But do you feel is that you are reluctant to raise it, or that she is reluctant to discuss it with you?
I don't think either of us are necessarily reluctant. I mean, your comment about a bottle of wine, that's almost obligatory between us anyway. It's more a bucket of wine, probably, each that we have whenever we get together. So I don't think there's any problems with actually having the discussion. I think it's knowing, again, back to your point about whether to keep it general or how specific we go, because I wouldn't even know some of the areas that I might need us to talk about. So I think if there is that online resource that gives a bit more of a hint as to the kind of areas that I need to be thinking about, that would be useful, because beyond that, I don't really know, other than things like, I might end up on a ventilator or needing CPR or something like that. That's about all I can really think of. I think having certain scenarios kind of put in front of me, and then I can think to myself, actually, what would I think I would want in that situation, and then have that discussion as well. I think it's having almost like a short list of those scenarios would really help me, certainly with that initial thinking, because otherwise I just don't know.
Right. The area I think you're most thinking about perhaps are areas that are covered by something like an advanced decision to refuse treatment. And then when you look at something like that, and there are a couple online. Now, I'm not sure that I've included that in the resources, but I'll make sure I give that to Julie afterwards, so it's added. There are sites that enable you to create an advanced decision to refuse treatment online. And you may take a look at that and say, well, actually, I would want that treatment in those circumstances. But that would be a place to start, perhaps, to give you an idea of the kind of things that you would be considering as to whether you wanted somebody to give or refuse consent for life-sustaining treatment, for example. Have you started going through the power of attorney form online? Because that also sort of, until you start doing that, throws up some questions you may want to think about.
My aunt's doing that for me, and in effect, I've got to I can't remember whichever section it is, where it basically says have the discussion with with your lasting power of attorney to kind of discuss your wishes, and you can kind of list some of them in this box type thing. It's really that kind of crux of it that I've got to, where I'm kind of hit the sticking point, really.
Yes, well, you may consider then not putting very much into your LPA at all, and doing a separate document which is just as legal, because then you can change that more easily if your thinking changes in the future. Whereas yes, of course you can change your lasting power of attorney, if only by cancelling it and doing a new one, but that's a bit more challenging than, as I say, having something like an ADRT in place.
Yeah, my aunt suggested the same about having a separate document. So it really is kind of, it's how to actually get that document started that I'm struggling with. But again, without wishing to hog the rest of the quarter of an hour, it'd be interesting to either hear what others have got to say or to move on to other questions. But thank you for all of that, because that is very useful.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Yeah, I think certainly for me, I've done it recently, we did leave it blank, and there are some amazing advanced directive tools online that we'll link you to separately as well, that ask different questions about, well, what would you do? It's almost like the constant what if situations. So Joe, I know you had a conversation with your son, didn't you? Did you want to just talk through how that happened for Rob?
Yeah, very, very, very briefly, what I would say is not a one-off conversation. A little like Jane with a mum and talking about the daffodils, it's amazing the assumptions we made, the unspoken assumptions we made about what I required and what my son was wanting to support me with. And it was really a quite shocking first conversation. Because we'd never talked about these things. And once we did start to talk and have an honest and open conversation, his questioning and my questioning of each other and what each other's expectations were changed the whole landscape of how that would be supported in the event of me having a stroke, in the event of me dying, but also, more importantly, I think, having that conversation not just with my son but also with my partner, who has been around for 26 years, but again, having that conversation raised a whole lot of questions and the nuances of what we wanted, that we made assumptions about, which we never really understood, we'd never expected before. But the conversation, and we're still having it now, but it's a much more open, transparent, and I think a much healthier conversation and understanding about what we require.
Brilliant. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Rob, for your question. That's really good. So I think lots and lots of conversations and tender conversations need to be had. Sam, is there anything urgent in the question box before we move on to taking some others live?
So I think we've got a bit of a theme coming up about people are asking, what if you don't have family? And I think we might have had a bit of a conversation about that already, but whether any of the panel want to comment on how people might choose who else. I think it was Rob said his best friend is the person he's having the conversation with. And the other ones we've got are some questions around who determines whether you've got capacity to enter into the lasting power of attorney when you do it.
So, Jane, can I come to you for people who perhaps don't have family and friends? Because I know, Jane, that you've sort of supported some people who might need this help who don't have immediate family.
Yeah, I mean, lots of the ways that we've actually looked at that is with circles of support, around people who are, because quite often obviously families, maybe the siblings or other relatives, but also people who played a very important part in that person's life. So people who have remained around that individual that could be a lasting power of attorney. But it is in all situations about people trying to find for example, where people have looked at discretionary trust, that's another subject, and things like that. The finding of trustees is really quite hard, and then people will seek to find a professional trustee or a professional attorney, and of course there are costs attributed to doing that. So it is a difficult area if there isn't actually somebody that you can rely on to do that. I think Zoe might have other things to say about older people in that way, but my you know, knowledge of people, for example, with no capacity, you know, they've come out of hospital, they haven't got anybody that's actually routing for them, then the local authority will tend to take those, you know, deputyship, well, the responsibilities for that individual. And you know, they will try and ascertain what that person would want. So a person-centered plan, a plan that actually works with people on what their end of life would be a really important thing, part of somebody's planning in that.
Great, thanks, Jane. Zoe, anything to add on that?
I think Jane's very much covered it all. As you say, it is challenging if you think that somebody literally has nobody. It's not so unusual that people say they don't have any family they can turn to. There often is a family, a friend who may be appropriate to take it on, but otherwise, as Jane said, there is the scope to go to a professional, but there are costs involved. And then if somebody can't then do anything more about it, it is a question of the system taking over and appointing a deputy for them.
And on the issue of who determines whether you have capacity, so if somebody has just perhaps had an early diagnosis of dementia, but is potentially by family and friends still deemed to have capacity, who would determine whether that person had capacity or not?
Right. Well, as you say, sometimes there's this immediate presumption that if you've had a diagnosis of dementia, you've lost capacity, which is entirely wrong. But you do need to demonstrate very clearly that you have got capacity. In the document, if you're doing it online or not, it has a place where you have to have what's called a certificate provider. And that person needs to have known them. They may be a professional or just a friend, but they need to sign to say that the donor, the person for whom the power of attorney is being set up, understands what they're doing, that nobody is forcing them to do it, and that in itself is a level of demonstrating mental capacity. But if there's any doubt at all, there are assessors. So either it's your GP or a healthcare professional that the person is working with, or there are professional mental capacity assessors who do this as their primary role.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to some live ones now. So Pippa, I'm coming to you. So you'll just need to unmute yourself. Can you do that, Pippa? Okay, I'll leave you to see if you can do that, Pippa. I'm coming to Ms. Chapman. So again, you'll just need to unmute your microphone. Hello.
Hello. I'm in a situation where I have a short court order for my son's finances. He's a middle-aged gentleman living in independent living with a team of support. He's got a learning disability. And back in 2004, when he turned 18, I got a short order for his bank accounts because he had very little money. That's what the Court of Protection deemed as the best solution. I'm now in a position where I'm getting on, and I'm doing a succession plan, which includes my daughter, his sister, wanting to do some of the roles and needing to do some of the roles going forward. So we're looking at initially doing a health and welfare Court of Protection order, full order, jointly and severally between us. Are the Court of Protection going to look at us favourably, because I already have a financial order for him, can you do this on your own quite easily, because it's very expensive to go through the solicitor?
Okay, so for deputyship and court protection, there's another webinar that's
All right.
taking place next week on the 14th, and we will actually have a solicitor
Okay.
there who's very familiar with court of protection issues. So I'm just thinking that might be better on the next webinar, unless
Okay.
Jane can think of just anything off the top now on this issue.
Okay.
I mean, just very briefly with that. So the short order is really a one-off. So that's actually probably enabled you at that time to sign a tenancy agreement and deal with, perhaps you were appointee and it just gave you a little bit more power also around dealing with his finances that you already had as appointee, but it hasn't given you very much really. It's just actually about that one-off signing of an agreement. It hasn't given you full property and finance.
It was specifically for his bank accounts and spending money.
Yeah,
so
right.
I mean, that's ongoing because that hasn't stopped because he's still got those bank accounts.
Yeah. So it's usually for a particular situation as opposed to getting a full-blown property and finance deputyship. So in order to talk about that in more depth, I think next week is a good time. An application for deputyship is straightforward, provided there's no objections to it. So I think next week when we actually go through, how you do that with the solicitor, then that will be helpful to you. But if there's objections, for example, from the local authority because they're arguing with you over something or whatever, it becomes more complicated. But if it's straightforward, you should be. As Julie and I and various people have said, if you can fill out a DLA form, you can fill out one of these forms. So
thank you very much.
Okay.
I'll speak next week. All right.
Brilliant, thank you. Hi, Pippa.
Hiya, can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Hope you were. Can you tell me what is the difference between having power of attorney and having trustees?
Right, did you get that?
Not fully.
Pippa would like to know what's the difference between having trustees and having power of attorneys.
Okay. So Jane, would you be the best one to? Sorry, Jane, I keep pulling you back out on this one, don't I?
I mean, either me, Zoe, or any of us really. You did. In a lasting power of attorney, it's the word that's used for that. So you've actually got attorneys to actually take over all of your affairs, while you're alive. Okay, so often with trusteeships, it's where money, for example, has been left to you, or property has been left to you, but it's not been left to you directly. So that there are trustees that manage your property and potentially manage your finance as well if they're appointees for you. So when you have actually got when you're applying for a lasting power of attorney, you're actively asking for people at some point to actually take over your affairs. And at the moment that you're doing that, you're usually managing your own affairs. You're normally, with help, sometimes actually managing those pretty well. Trustees are people who, if for example you have, say you've been left money or you've been compensated with money, the money is actually managed for you throughout your life by those trustees. Property can be managed for you throughout your life without, from those trustees. They're not usually managing your health and welfare. That's unless they've got something like a lasting power of attorney or a deputyship to do that.
Oh, you're saying that.
Thanks, Pippa. Okay, so there's nobody else online now, Sam. Is there any others in the question box?
We've got some more questions that are about the step-by-step process. And I don't know whether that will be picked up if people want to read that afterwards or whether anybody wants to talk about that. But there's some questions about what does it actually involve. And then there are a couple of questions about that I think relate to who you can either have as replacement attorneys, or if people can choose somebody else to be their attorney if they don't want to have their parents, for example. Is it acceptable to not go with the obvious? I think, and again, there's a couple of questions that relate to what if there's conflict between family members on who should be somebody's lasting power of attorney.
Okay.
Is that helpful?
So yeah, that's brilliant. So Zoe, shall we go for that last one? So just to be clear, you don't have to just have one. So you can have several. So in our family recently, there is 3 that have actually been put down, and we have some in reserve as well. So don't misunderstand that you only have to have one person to take all these decisions. You can have more than one. So Zoe, do you want to add on to that? Because I'm thinking the step-by-step might be in your handbook as well as the guidance that comes online.
Yes, it is, Julie, and I think also step by step in a way the slides I gave an overview at the beginning of this presentation, but the step by step really, if people are comfortable with going online, or even if they're comfortable with downloading the form, that gives them a good indication of the things they're going to have to think about, even if they don't do it at that time. As for replacements, a number of attorneys, you're absolutely right. You can have more than one. As I said, you need to then think about whether they're going to act jointly and have to make every decision together. So if you suddenly think, I've got 5 children, I'm going to make all 5 of them my attorneys, you do have to think the practicalities of, if are they all living close enough or able to communicate to be able to make those decisions? Is that a practical way of doing it? Or jointly and severally, then are you comfortable with the fact that one person might be taking all those decisions and another not? Replacements, I think, is quite important, because if you just choose one person and then for whatever reason they are unable to act for you, if you haven't got a replacement in place, that LPA is effectively ended, and you have to, if you have capacity, you have to start again. If you haven't got capacity, of course, you no longer have an LPA in place. So it is finding that right balance between family situations and involving the appropriate people without getting too many to make it unwieldy. And also considering, if you appoint one person and not another, is that going to cause stress and tension in the family? But as for what choice you have over who you choose, you have complete choice. They have to be over 18. They have to have mental capacity to make decisions. I don't even believe they have to live in the UK. So you can choose entirely who you wish, based on obviously your confidence that they are going to be able to take the job on if needed.
Brilliant. Thank you. Okay, I know that we're sort of just getting beyond our time now. Thank you so much for the panel, for sharing all the experiences. Thank you, Sam, for being behind with the question box. There will be some questions in the box that we probably haven't had time, but we will do a question and answer sheet on that. Zoe, are you happy for your slide set to be shared separate to the webinar recording?
Yes, of course, whatever you think's best.
Brilliant. So more, yes, you can have those slide guides. We'll add them on as we put it up on the website, and of course all the links as well that Zoe shared, and we will add some of the other links like advanced directives that just help people to think about what sort of questions or what sort of issues to think about. So any last words from our panel? Jane?
There was just a slight one in that I thought that when people are going into supported living and you're actually signing up a tenancy for someone with a lasting power of attorney, you're able, if that person can't sign their tenancy and you sign that, or a deputyship, it's as though you've got that tenancy, and it does give you an awful lot more rights where people start saying you can't visit and things like that. So I think just in a COVID situation, I just wanted to get that over really to people.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jane. Jo?
Yeah, all that I would say on these areas that are sometimes very, very complicated and very sort of uncharted territory, that to actually be prepared to start the uncomfortable conversations.
Brilliant. Thanks, Joe. Zoe?
Yeah, totally endorse that. And there is no time too soon to start this. Start it today. You never know what's around the corner.
Brilliant. Sam, any final thoughts from you?
No, I just wanted to thank the speakers on everybody's behalf. I think that it was fantastic and really, really interesting. Thank you so much.
Brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, me too. Thank you ever so much. And thank you for attending the webinar. It will be recorded both on Be Human and on YouTube. And like I said, there is another session next week on the 14th that's around court protection and deputyship for those that have currently not deemed to have capacity. So that's all for now. Thank you ever so much. It's been lovely seeing you all again. I can see some of the familiar names. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.